You know, some stories are just so bizarre they have to be true, and this is definitely one of them. We're talking about a David and Goliath showdown, but it wasn't fought with guns. It was fought with giant underwater scissors. This is the incredible story of how tiny Iceland took on a global superpower all over a fish. So, just imagine this for a second. You're this tiny island nation, and your opponent? That's the United Kingdom, with the whole Royal Navy at its back. I mean, the odds are just completely stacked against you, right? How could you possibly win? And here's the real kicker. You have to do it without starting an actual all-out war. It's a complete riddle, but Iceland, well, they found a way. And what they did, it ended up changing the world. So let's set the scene. We're in the cold, fish-rich waters of the North Atlantic. After Iceland gets its independence in 1944, it realizes its most precious resource, cod, is being fished out by huge foreign fleets. And their solution was pretty bold, just claim more of the ocean for themselves.
Okay, so the whole fight really boils down to this one idea, the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. It's the concept that a country has special rights to the resources in the water right off its coast. Now, back then, this was a pretty radical idea, and other countries were not on board. But Iceland decided to force the issue.
And this is maybe the most important part to understand, why this whole thing even happened. The stakes were completely different for each side. For Iceland, this was about national survival. We're talking up to 90% of their export money came from fish. For the UK, it was an important industry, sure, but it was still just 1% of their economy. When one side is fighting to survive and the other is fighting for a line item on a budget, that changes everything. So, how does a country with no navy fight one of the world's most powerful? You'd think the answer would be to, build a navy. But Iceland, they decided to throw out the playbook completely. They came up with something that made the Royal Navy's power almost useless. And this was their secret weapon. It wasn't a missile, it wasn't a torpedo, it was a brilliantly simple invention called a trawl-wire cutter. Basically, giant underwater scissors. I mean, the plan was just genius in its simplicity. Instead of fighting the warships, Iceland's tiny coast guard would just sail right past them and attack the real problem, the fishing nets. And let me tell you, this tactic was just brutally effective. An Icelandic boat would drag this cutter behind a British fishing trawler. The hook would catch onto the steel wires holding the net, and snap! Just like that, the British boat lost its super expensive net and, of course, all the fish inside. It was simple. Nobody got hurt, but man, it was an economic gut punch to the British fishing fleet. Now, this wasn't just a one-off skirmish. This was a long, drawn-out war of nerves that played out in 3 different phases over almost 20 years. And each time, Iceland got bolder and bolder with its demands. And you can really see how they just kept upping the ante over the years. It started in '58, going from 4 miles out to 12. Then in '72, they pushed it all the way to 50. And finally, in 1975, they went for the whole enchilada, 200 nautical miles, a number that, at the time, was just unthinkable. And every single time, Britain fought back hard. And look, while it's amazing that only one person tragically died in all of this, don't think it wasn't dangerous out there. There were ships ramming each other on purpose, warning shots being fired, tons of collisions in these rough seas. In just the last Cod War, Iceland cut British nets 35 times. It got so bad that Iceland, a NATO ally, literally cut off diplomatic ties with the UK. I mean, think about that. But here's the twist. The net cutters were clever, for sure, but they weren't Iceland's ultimate weapon. No, their biggest advantage wasn't at sea at all. It was all about geopolitics. And it was the one trump card Britain just couldn't play against. See, Iceland's location in the North Atlantic made it absolutely critical for NATO during the Cold War. The American airbase there at Keflavik was basically NATO's eye in the sky, watching for Soviet submarines. And Iceland knew it. They played that card for all it was worth, threatening to shut down the base or even walk away from NATO entirely if they didn't get their way. And really, this quote from the British Foreign Secretary just sums up the whole dilemma. The Americans and the rest of NATO leaned hard on Britain to just give in. The big picture of the Cold War was way more important than the British fishing industry. Basically, Britain was trapped, a total political checkmate. So Iceland won, but the story doesn't stop there, because their victory didn't just save their economy, it completely rewrote the rules for how we all think about the oceans. 200 nautical miles. Remember that number? The one that seemed so crazy and radical when Iceland first demanded it? Well, it was about to become the new normal for everybody. What Iceland fought for tooth and nail actually became international law. The United Nations made the 200-mile EEZ official in 1982. Just incredible. A tiny nation's struggle had set a new global standard that affects every coastal country on Earth today. But, there are always two sides to a story. And a victory for Iceland was absolutely devastating for the other side. For British fishing towns, losing access to those rich waters was catastrophic. Places like Grimsby, which had been the biggest fishing port in the world, were just gutted. And I mean, just look at these numbers. They tell a brutal story. In 1970, Grimsby had a fleet of 400 deep-sea trawlers. By 2013, there were only 5. This isn't just data on a chart. This is the end of an industry. It's a whole way of life for thousands of families, just gone. So it all leaves us with this really interesting question. The Cod Wars proved that military might isn't the only thing that matters. It shows us that real power sometimes isn't about having the biggest guns. It's about having the strongest will, the smartest strategy, and maybe, just maybe, a giant pair of scissors.